Everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Chronic Couch. One of the coolest things I think about living in a city like Los Angeles is the people you meet. And a couple months ago, I met someone really cool, and we definitely struck up a conversation about all things chronic pain, mental game. Miss Tessa, welcome to the Chronic Couch.
Thanks so much for having me, you guys.
Yeah, we're pumped to talk about what you do, and I'm gonna kind of pass it off to you. I know that your company is called Visualizing 360. Can you kind of tell us more about that and what exactly it is that you do?
So I think starting with, I come from a background in healthcare, and I've really witnessed firsthand what I call this era of kind of overprescription, especially with chronic pain, anxiety, stress. We're treated with medication, but rarely is it ever coupled with prescriptions for lifestyle-based mind-body interventions. So I saw so many people suffering with symptoms, but no one was really asking about the nervous system, beliefs, stress load. And that's not really out of lack of care. It's just because the system is really designed for these really short, 15-minute, meetings with each patient. So that really led me down a path of curiosity, urgency, seeing all these people with medication still suffering. How do we actually heal the body from within? So I was really drawn to holistic medicine. And that's when I really realized that the mind and body are not separate. They're very intricately linked. And essentially, when we train the mind and body to optimize our functioning, our minds can become very potent pharmacies. And we can retrain the nervous system, regulate it, and start living in alignment with our physiology. So Visualize was born. I came together with a team of really like-minded individuals. And the passion is really just bridging that gap between traditional and holistic medicine through science. So whether someone's struggling with chronic stress or trying to break through, those performance blocks when it comes to athletic or high executive functioning, those same principles kind of apply, and that we need a nervous system to feel safe and supported.
So, wow, it's very informative, and it's definitely something that Chris and I and the people we've talked to, our common themes are exactly what you just brought up. Now, when you're scrolling through the Visualizing 360, the Instagram page, and the website, you see a trippy hat brain looking situation. Can you kind of tell us what that's about?
Sorry, a trippy brain looking situation.
Like the brain mapping. The
Oh,
cat.
yes. Yes, of course. I know. I forget that it honestly just looks so different to someone who's never seen it before. Yeah, it's cool. I mean, so this technology a couple of years ago would not have been able to be as accessible as it is now. In order to get a brain map, it used to cost thousands of dollars, be reduced to a clinical setting, take hours long just to get this picture of the brain. And the tech has gotten so advanced where now we can get a full picture of how your brain is functioning, in terms of anxiety and depression levels, ability to focus, how regulated you are emotionally. We can get this huge picture in just 20 minutes. And it really starts to set a protocol for, okay, where's there imbalance in the brain? Where does there need to be more cohesive talking among parts of the brain? And from there, we can actually build out a program that brings it back to balance.
That is interesting because I think we've been talking about a lot of progresses that have been made in the medical field. And again, right now on the edge of AI, on the road towards quantum computing, it's only going to get faster and hopefully more readily available, right? So can you talk about that process? Because when I think about these mapping studies, the most experience that I'm going to have is an MRI, and I've had a DEXA scan before, right? But that's pretty much the extent of what I've done to have my body mapped from a perspective of here's what it looks like, here's the data, and what it goes on from here is whatever's up to my sports nutritionist. But when it comes to the mind mapping that Visualizing 360 does, what's that like for a patient, client? What do we call them?
Clients. It just makes it less clinical and really brings regulation into everyday language. Kind of destigmatizes mental health a little bit, because we're all dealing with dysregulation at some level. So I just like the accessibility of clients and, people that I work with. But yeah, so to get into that question, when you do an MRI or something, it's more structural. So it's looking, do you have a brain bleed? Do you have physical injury to the brain? A QEEG, which is what we do, it's a quantitative encephalography, that looks at more of the neuronal networks of the brain. So again, going back to think anxiety patterns, focus and regulation, sleep. So it's actually how those neuronal networks are cross-talking to each other. So that can really start to identify areas of overactivity, that could be tied to restlessness, anxiety, or it can be tied to areas of underactivity when we're not really feeling motivated, or we're not really being able to focus and things like that. So getting this whole picture of the brain, not only through the brain map, but using cognitive measures as well that are research backed. So looking at what you believe in yourself, how can you handle yourself under pressure? Are you able to kind of be flexible in your thinking when something doesn't go your way? Having a full cognitive profile really allows us to see what's going on in your brain and those areas kind of that we can actually work with. Because I think you said you use neuroplasticity. It's such an incredible area of the brain or area of science that's showing us we can rewire the brain from the inside out. And that's really what these tools are looking to show.
So if we were to go back, let's say 3 months, and you were to take a brain map of a former gymnast who maybe grew up with some, intense anxiety, mostly stemming from their sport, and, they're fresh out of 3 back surgeries, and they're trying to acclimate back to normal life, what would that brain map pick up?
So what's interesting with peak performers is a lot of them are shocked to find out they have so much anxiety, because for them, it doesn't necessarily show up in the traditional anxiety we think of, where it's overthinking or panic. So for them, it might show up in tension, reactivity, inflammation, the need to always be on. But what that's going to show up in the brain is what we call overactive beta. So beta is a brainwave frequency that we need to stay alert and focused. Think when you're at work, you need to be in beta. When you're, performing some highly analytical task, you're in beta. The problem is if beta does not switch off. So when we close our eyes, when we go to sleep, when we just, sit down and relax, if that beta does not switch to a lower frequency like alpha, that is an indicator that there's a lot of anxiety and that kind of imbalance in the brain. And that shows up in different regions depending on what the person is dealing with. So that's typically what we look for with a peak performer in that scenario.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it definitely has a little bit more scientific back to it, like you're saying. So I'm sure Eric is just like me on this one. We're learning a lot. So we appreciate you giving us the rundown tonight. And then our audience, when they hear this, obviously they're going to be blown away as well. I kind of want to keep us on that client journey, right? So let's say this person that Eric has made up in his head has got of his brain map, right? What's the next step for this hypothetical person out there that is now a client?
So the next step is getting them into a program. Our programs are all at least 8 weeks. Although it differs for every person, 8 weeks is kind of an understood number on how long it takes to train new habits. So in the brain, that's how we at least want to spend 8 weeks rewiring habits. So they go through an 8-week course that is designed to regulate the areas of the nervous system that we're identifying have imbalance. And there's no one size fits all approach to this. So we really try to customize a program based on what that brain map is showing us and what that cognitive assessment is showing us. But it really is bringing together a lot of different research-backed tools like meditation, breath work, self-reflection, flow state, cognitive behavioral therapy. If there's a lot of negative thoughts present, we need to kind of reframe those. So there's a lot of different tools to really bring together and build a package. Some people also need neurofeedback, which is a more intensive way of training the brain day in and day out, using the brain's own feedback mechanisms, enhances neuroplasticity. So it really has to do with an individual client by client basis.
Do you find common trends of people who may have been sexually assaulted, or athletes, or someone suffering from PTSD from a bad car accident, or is it really just individualized per map, per brain map?
No, there's definitely correlations, like something like trauma, that we can see that in the brain. It's a localized built up energy in the brain, and that shows in different regulation patterns. So we can see, okay, trauma is here, and we've learned that trauma isn't really about the event itself. It's about the way that the experience has imprinted itself on the nervous system, meaning it's kind of this unprocessed emotion and energy that hasn't yet been released. So we see that as dysregulation. And when we employ the tools to be able to release that, then we see that regulation come back into the brain. So it's something that you can actually see and measure, and that's what I love about this technology. It doesn't have to be elusive. Like, have I healed from my trauma? Like, you have feedback that's actually showing you are releasing this kind of tension and this emotion.
For our listeners out there, I think a lot of people, especially living here in LA, we hear a lot in terms of, oh, try this new meditation technique, try this new diet, all these different things. And I'm not going to lie, I have been one of the people that has been highly skeptical of looking in the mirror and doing affirmations every morning. But there is obviously science behind this that I've become aware of, even in my own recovery, that you can, like we talked about beforehand, you can actually create new neural pathways. And obviously that's something that would show up in a mind map, right? Over like a time period. I mean, if we're going to say 8 weeks is going to be the window here, you could essentially build those new neural pathways to where you are in essence rewiring your brain to think and, I guess, conceptually be different, right?
Of course. Yeah. I think affirmations are the number one thing where people are like, this just feels like it's not doing anything, and I feel like a fraud. And that is because your brain creates expectations, and it creates this internal map based on what it's experienced, based on that past performance. It predicts the future based on the past. So when you're saying affirmations in the mirror and it sounds very unfamiliar and fraud-like, it's because you literally have not created that internal map to feel like that's real, and to feel like you're actually able and be motivated to take action as that kind of person. So these kind of techniques, although you feel fraud-like in the beginning, when they're coupled with aligned action in that area that you're, affirming, new neural pathways are going to be built. And then what happens is you literally start to feel like that's real. So you're motivated to take opportunities that you would have previously been like, that's insane, I'm not doing that. Or you're not tuning out things that come to you that you would have been like, that's ridiculous. Or, I'm not even going to look into this opportunity. It doesn't make sense. So it really is about this feeling, being motivated, looking at different things that actually changes the lens through which you're kind of operating and viewing the world.
I don't know if the term manifest is, it's obviously a huge part of LA culture, right? And pop culture. But I have become myself a form or a sub part of a manifester. And to go back to the affirmations, like I have sticky notes all over my apartment. You know, and when I was in the thick of being in chronic pain, it was like sticky notes with a smiley face, or like I had a countdown to the surgery date, and it has continued on to where I can be as specific as, like, you know, talk to this executive today at work, or, you know, drink a lot of water. How, and for me, it has helped. And you mentioned coupling it with the second step. I almost wonder, for me, like, subconsciously, have I taken that second step? But my question is, how does manifestation tie into what you do at Visualize N360?
Yeah, and I love that you say that, because I think manifestation as a term has gotten so misunderstood, but the foundation is that it is a neural reprogramming technique. So you are training yourself to align with a future version of yourself, someone who has a different inner map than you currently have now. So it's not this wishful thinking, because wishful would be operating from the conscious mind, like, oh, I want this to happen, but secretly I'm fearing that I'm not. So it is about reprogramming that part of yourself that actually doesn't believe that it's possible, or has fear surrounding it. And when you reprogram that subconscious, that is when you start to align with those opportunities, because your mental map is updated. You're now seeking out that type of life and those type of opportunities. So it's always like interesting using the term manifestation in scientific circles. I always say neural reprogramming, but then for everyday people, it's like, no, it is manifestation. It's just, like, switch it kind of in your mind, and don't think of it as this like woo spiritual practice. Think of it as like, I'm doing the work to train myself.
Yeah, and I feel like that's one of the beauties of just conversations like this, because I think what you do is, it can be perceived as very complex, but it shouldn't scare people, right? So I love the fact that you're here to explain that, no, this is a thing, it's scientifically backed, it's not a hoax, and people don't have to be afraid of the technology, because it's the same thing as those long medical terms, just manifestation, which again, we've heard time and time again. When you talk about this, like, program, after they get their 8-week program or whatever, along with something that Eric mentioned before about having the sticky notes, how important is it to optimize your environment for success too? Because I know, you know, certain parts of the brain light up with scents. I know Eric and I, we both love candles, you know, not together, but individually. But you
I
know,
feel
I just
you.
think it's something that I think is super important, because I look at it completely different now, because I suffer from peroneal nerve palsy. So I have foot drop. So it's probably not wise for me to have rugs and other things just laying around, because I could easily trip. So we always talk about optimizing your environment, but again, that's in a 3-dimensional physical space. With your clients, could you talk about the importance of your environment and just kind of a nature versus nurture approach, even though we're adults going through different things?
Yeah, definitely. So environment is so critical, because remember, we're not, to understand manifestation and that we're co-creating our reality, means that reality is also creating us. So we're gaining feedback from all the data that we're taking in, and that's telling us what feels safe, what we can expect. That's also creating that internal map. So if you haven't optimized your environment for the roadmap that you're now trying to attain to, the roadmap that you're going into, it's just going to keep sending back signals that this isn't really aligned. This isn't safe enough for you to step into. So having not only the physical surroundings, but people who support you in this journey, and especially with their language and things like that, is critical. Because not only can you just go through life expecting, that's again getting back into the stereotypical thing of manifestation. We think, oh, we just create everything. We can just go through life like making things happen. And it's like, no, there is this feedback system with the environment. So we have to make sure we're on the same page. Optimizing that space of when I wake up every day, I need to be reminded of where I'm going. I don't have, maybe a rug in my apartment, not because I'm someone who's, crippled by this injury and this is all it has to be. I've now made peace with this. I now have to adjust my life into I'm someone who is adaptive and I've overcome this. And that is just me being smart about my future. If you don't optimize your environment, it's kind of in this resistant pattern where it's like, I haven't really accepted what's going on. I'm just kind of taking in, consuming, and I'm not really creating where I want to go.
So, I was bedbound for a total of a year. And in that time, you have so much time to think about the lowest of lows. And you're thinking about all your relationships and the dynamics of those relationships. And I believe you might have just mentioned cutting people out, or was that just something I was thinking? Okay.
Yeah, people in your environment.
Okay, so I think coupled with age and maturity, with my injury and surgeries, I learned about the people I want in my life and the people that I'm like, okay, it's time to move on. Is that conversation something that you talk about with your clients? Like, are they coming to you and telling you, their deepest, darkest secrets, or do they let the brain mapping kind of lead the way?
No, I mean, with this kind of work, it is so deep and raw, and it gets into the heart of those kind of survival drives, and relationships are just such a big part in that. That's why we have like a neuropsychologist that works with us to be able to get into those kinds of dynamics. And a big thing there is realizing that you have to realize it's not cutting out a person, it's cutting out someone who's triggering a wound that is then playing a part in this pain matrix. And that's something that people, it's hard to recognize because it's like, oh no, it's just this person. I should be able to create boundaries. But the way that pain gets linked in the brain is it's linked to emotion and memory. And when things trigger that, it can make the pain chronic and it can exacerbate it. So that's just something, like, relationships are such a big part in that. And although it's difficult, it's sometimes a really necessary part of healing.
Okay. I'm curious, just what your thoughts are. We kind of hit on this, but what are your thoughts on the culture of cold plunge and Pilates and going on a hike and getting outside? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, so cold plunge, I find really fascinating because it's a way to kind of train our stress response to adapt to uncomfortable environments. So there's a lot of physiological benefits with cold plunging, but what I'm really interested in is the psychological benefits. So when you go into this really uncomfortable environment, it might be piercing. All you want to do, you're actually sending off the brain's fear response. And it's making you want to get out. It's making you want to breathe really rapidly. To be able to sit time and time again and train that response to come down is you training the stress response. And that will translate into other areas of your life. So when you're at work and you feel really heated, someone triggers you, you're in the heat of the moment, your nervous system now is trained to be able to adapt with that. So those kinds of techniques, cold plunging, breath work, like that is like a great way to target the mind-body system and actually work with your stress.
That's fascinating because in college, we didn't have a choice. After every practice, we had to go shower and then get in the cold tub because for us, again, it was recovery. But what you're saying makes so much sense because it essentially raises your floor of tolerance for stress. And, whether or not I knew I was building it at 19 years old, it probably has been not only cultivated from that, but it's something I can rely on for the rest of my life. So it's just interesting to hear it from a psychoanalytical perspective, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, for people that are watching, like I've been looking off from the screen because I'm just checking out y'all sites, and just I love the fact that we'll link it in the comments, but I mean I love the fact that y'all are really, it's not no LA foo shit. Like y'all got like legit scientists on here, and people that have a responsibility. You got VPs of engineering and sustainability strategy. You got chief scientific officers, which I'm like, oh shit, like that's real. So it's just I
Thank
want to
you.
commend y'all on actually building something that's not. It's so easy to build nonsense nowadays. So again, like I want people out there to know, like, go check out the site and see like the work that's being done, because it's amazing. And one of my friends recommended. Are you familiar with Marissa Peer?
No.
So Marissa Peer, she's a lady, I think she's from the UK, but she has beaten cancer twice, and
Oh,
essentially she's kind of famous for this mental mapping and kind of rewiring.
cool.
I'm not saying this to be like immature at all. This is her actual framework. I kid you not. Her framework is DICCC. It's called the Dick method, right? And it stands for direct, instruct, command, compel, and code your body. So essentially kind of the same thing, because it's realizing that we do have the power to command our body to act a certain way. But as this conversation is showing us, it's not just another thing on the internet. We actually do have the ability, but people, I think they can get so caught up in Western medicine, which puts you into a box at times. And Eric and I know this. Like, I have a Chinese medicine practitioner, so I'm all about
Cool.
holistic methods, right? So, I think the perfect blend, and you can, please chime in here. Do you think that perfect blend of medicine as we move forward into the future is holistic, Eastern, Western, everybody kind of meeting in that Venn diagram to truly push medicine forward?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said that better myself. And I'm glad that you've gotten direct experience with that, because unfortunately, people only turn sometimes to holistic medicine when they have no other option. And the pain is so unbearable, and they've run out of things. Um, what I see is now emerging science. We see like quantum physics, neuroplasticity, epigenetics. This is now giving a scientific validation for what ancient Eastern traditions have been saying for millennia. It's just putting the science to it. So like, as crazy as the world is right now, like, this is such an amazing time to be alive and to be understanding this space, because the future of healthcare is really changing. And I think it's really about empowering people to understand that, like, you have a supercomputer inside of you. It's not just, oh, this is who I am. It's, you need to program it with the code. And most of us are just running outdated code, and we're just feeding our body with stuff that's like depleting the code. But the more we learn, like, ways to live and thrive, it's such a game changer for the future.
It's really interesting, Tessa, because yesterday we had on one of my former teammates who I hadn't seen in 20 years, and he's a nurse, and he's back in med school, and ironically, he's studying neurology. And he kind of mentioned that what you just said, and I find it fascinating that you just said this is such a great time to be alive, because he also said, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but at the same token, he was saying that the way medicine is moving right now is, it's moving in a direction that seems to be, it's going to be very helpful. And the fact that we're going to be alive for what's to come is, something I think we should be grateful for, So yeah, I remember, you and I met, and I was like, there's no way that, like, I was just so not dumbfounded, but shocked about what you do, because it, being in a situation like myself and what Chris is in with our injuries, it's hard to find a market or people that are up for having these discussions. So I'm curious, you're talking to two dudes here. What is your what's your demo like in the office and what's your clientele? Can you speak to that? And then also the two-parter is, what can you say about the stigma behind men talking about these kinds of issues?
Yeah, of course. So part of what makes us really unique is you can access our services from anywhere in the country. So we're able to mail you a brain map, have our services done online. We also operate partner with different wellness centers in LA where we do cold plunge events, meditations, breath work. So it's definitely a very, accessible kind of model. We work with, I think, really two types of people. One, dealing with anxiety, and not even necessarily like overt chronic anxiety, but people who are kind of dealing with low self-esteem, limited blocks. They want to generate a change, but they've been feeling stuck for a while. And then conversely, peak performers. So high achievers, athletes, people who are looking to kind of level up their performance. And I think what everyone thinks when they start this work is, okay, it's going to be mindset. I'm just going to have to change the way that I think. And this is all going to be good. But what you quickly find out is that there are these deep rooted emotions in the body. Especially for athletes, when you get an injury, like, it's not just the body taking a hit, it's your identity, your sense of control, your future vision for what this means for you. And the nervous system is encoding all of it. So it's not just storing what happened, the physical injury, it's now storing how you felt. So that powerlessness, that fear, that failure, it gets embedded there. And not just for men, for everyone, it becomes so easy to just, let's ignore it, let's bypass it, let's pretend that it's not there. Pull myself up on my bootstraps. That's what strong people do. But what we know now with science is that those emotions don't go away. They actually embed themselves like way deeper in the nervous system, and they become the lens through which we view the future. Because remember, the nervous system is predicting based on the past. We're already linking those emotions within us. So now we're kind of expecting new situations to be like that. So that's why even after the tissue heals, anything that reactivates that memory of like loss, fear, uncertainty, it's going to evoke the sensation of pain or powerlessness, or, it can show up in a lot of ways. Tension. Some people have performance blocks physically, they get nauseous, blurred vision, lightheadedness, maybe mentally, they feel really, really ready and then they choke at the last minute. So these blocks kind of come up, and I think it's difficult to understand that when you are able to confront those really painful, difficult emotions, that's then when they release their hold on you. And that's when they actually turn into more fluid and they can be released from the body. And the body isn't like holding that tension. It's not subconsciously bracing and going through life like that. So especially with men, it's difficult because you guys were also taught like that strength doesn't come from that vulnerability. And now we're finding that it is critical to be able to go there.
Oh yeah, I mean, we'll be the first to tell you it's not a fun place to be, but I'm glad that we now have the tools such as yours to kind of just explain it, right? Because I think one thing that we have at our disposal now is technology like yours and just decades of data at this point, as opposed to our parents, where again, like, they didn't have all of this. So it was literally what you're saying. No, the man has to be the warrior. There's no room for emotion. There's no room for anything besides putting food on the table.
And
So
they
it's
also
like this,
weren't talking about this stuff. Our parents weren't talking about it.
exactly, right? And I think that's something that I love about this technology, because I think for the skeptics out there, well, show me a study. All right, well, here's a whole ass research back company about it, right? Because a lot of people, they
Oh
want to
yeah.
be skeptics if they're uncomfortable. So, on that same token, right, if we're kind of going through this client journey, because I really want to give people a chance to step into the shoes of what it's like to work with you. Let's say, all right, you got somebody, this hypothetical person that Eric was talking about before, and he's about to click that button, right? But is there a common theme that people don't want to face with this? Like, is it kind of just like like you said, kind of maybe like performance anxiety, right? But do you find when you do get a new client, if there was ever any hesitancy in doing it, what was that? Do people just not want to look in the mirror or what?
I think it really goes back to the fact that this landscape, like you said, the wellness landscape is so convoluted and it's really hard to know if something is going to work. And we have this kind of fear mechanism that kicks in. It's called outcome pain, where it's like, even if I go through all this work and I look within and I do the hard work and I confront these emotions and I make changes in my life, I'm still going to feel unfulfilled. I'm still going to feel like nothing's really worked. So these psychological mechanisms that create fear literally start to embed the mind being like, it's easier to stay where you are. This is what you know. Because that's the crazy thing about the brain. It doesn't like non-familiar. It wants to stick to what it's know. Even if that pattern is unhealthy, it's hurting you. It's not useful. It doesn't make you happy. The subconscious doesn't care. It doesn't have judgment. It's just whatever you reinforce as being the most familiar is where it's most comfortable, and it'll try everything to just keep you in that state.
You know what's interesting? I read, sorry, Eric, I bring this up just because I read this article literally right before we got on Substack. And it was this woman who was writing about the fact that the human body actually gives the same response to the person who says they're about to write and the person who actually wrote, but it can't discern the difference between actually doing it. So it was basically talking about how you might as well just go ahead and do it, because your brain only knows do. So again, like you're saying, you kind of have to push it off the ledge to get that reinforcement, to get it to grow into a new space, because your brain is like, no, I'm cool here on this cliff. I'm good. This is comfortable. Like I'm solid. So it's just very interesting that you bring that up. And I just had to say that because it was super timely, and I didn't want to just represent later on. And people were like, Chris, what the hell are you talking about? But go ahead, Eric.
No, I was just going to say, to bring it back to visualize, and then, we'll start wrapping up here. How did you guys land on the 8 weeks? What's the magic behind the 8 weeks? Is that just an average? Is that where the most success has come from that 8-week time period?
Yeah. So, really the best way to change the brain, reprogram the nervous system is just through practice and reinforcement on a daily basis. There's no way around it. People want these like really quick schemes and like, okay, I can get these hacks, but it's going to change only through daily practice and reinforcement. So understanding that, we really tried to analyze the research on habit formation. Now, everyone is different, and obviously way deep-rooted habits, versus like more superficial ones are going to be differing in time length that it takes. But there is an understanding that 8 weeks is a significant amount of time for most people to make these changes. And when we started this research, or when we started our company, we did a lot of research study. And we really started to see, can we actually make these changes within the brain in 8 weeks? And when we were able to see such significant changes, that's when we kept going with our 8-week program. Obviously, that differs. Some people, when we do neurofeedback, we extend it to 3 months, 4 months. So again, like just that differing, but 8 weeks seems to be the best for most people.
Oh, that's great. In terms of the tailoring of it, I think is important, because sometimes, like you said, if that tree is so deeply rooted, it's going to take some extra time. So knowing that it's not just this cookie cutter program that, again, keeps y'all from being foo-foo with the rest of the market, I think that's important for people to know too, because you're going to get that tailored situation that's going to be uniquely crafted for you.
Yeah, definitely. And just also to go back to what you said, I think the brain not being able to tell the difference between actually doing something and imagining yourself doing it, that's really the underlying benefit of visualization, which is where our name is really rooted. Because I just think it's one of the most powerful tools, not only for neural reprogramming, but also for performance, for getting us to go after those meaningful goals. It's pretty incredible that we can take something that's so natural and the brain does, and use it to our advantage there.
Obviously there's naysayers with everything, and especially something that like this that might sound so innovative, but to take Chris's words, has been backed by science. So for now, we're going to say F to the naysayers. But what would you say to people that are curious about brain mapping, and maybe they're scared to try because maybe they're afraid of what will come back?
Yeah. Well, number one, there's just so much research. It's just like take an hour or so and just do a deep dive. And if you are unable to interpret it, throw it into ChatGPT and get its thoughts and have it, put it in more layman terms, because I don't think it should just be reserved for like the scientific community. Like, it's just really great insight into how we can all live well and how we can optimize ourselves and our performance. And I think what makes people afraid of this is, again, I'm going to be confronted with something that I can't change. And it's just going to make me confront with my own insecurities and fears. But the paradox is that by confronting them, you actually start the path of changing them. So you have to have that acceptance. There's like a great quote that's like, when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Really famous psychiatrist who said that. And it's like, we just need to confront those fears and those parts of ourselves that we think are keep holding us back. And in doing so, we actually become someone that we could have never even imagined. So I know that it's a lot, but just take small leaps. It doesn't have to be the whole huge jump. Just little by little, like, start looking into different research, start reading about different blogs that you maybe wouldn't have connected with before, and just start to open those pathways.
And on that note too, I think it's important because, again, you all have a very scientific, research-backed company that you've built. And we're big on actionable takeaways. So going back to our favorite hypothetical person that doesn't exist anywhere, where could they start in terms of finding information? So if they're going to take 30 minutes to an hour and just look somewhere, am I looking on Facebook? Am I looking on WebMD? Where am I looking? Am I looking on Google Scholar? Like, where are some places that people can actually find some good information that they can put into ChatGPT and put in layman's terms that are reputable?
Yeah, you can Google PubMed. PubMed is a hub for all peer-reviewed research studies. Peer-reviewed means it wasn't just done by one person, it's confirmed by many other scientists. So it has to be peer-reviewed to be able to get on that website. So that's where you're going to find a lot of reputable articles that are for free. The other option would be going to specific universities, but often you have to pay for those. So I'd start with PubMed and kind of go from there, looking into then other ones that kind of offshoot. They'll always show like where they pulled from, what they relied on. So you start to get like a good picture there.
That's awesome, Tessa. You really hit it home with saying accept and acceptance, and that I say it every episode. That is the overarching theme of everything that I have been through, and what I tell listeners and viewers is you have to get to that place of an acceptance, and you can't force yourself to that place. So it's very validating to hear you say that. Everything that you have said has been educational and beyond enlightening. So thank you. When I met you at Shafiq's, you created a safe space for me to drunkenly talk to you about my problems. So sober to sober, thank you again for creating a safe space. Where can people find your company, Visualize in 360?
Yeah, best place would be website visualizing360.com. Send us a message, even if you just want to hop on a call and kind of get an idea of like, what you're going through and maybe like how, what tools are available for you. There's no pressure with that. So just love to connect.
Sweet. Chris, you got anything, my guy?
No, I mean, like I said, I think this is super educational. I love this type of stuff. So these conversations are always fun, and I'm glad, Tessa, you brought just a new dynamic to the show, because I think it's this is also a part of chronic illnesses or chronic injuries, is the entire mental component. So a conversation strictly around mental health and actionable ways to help you just feel better about yourself is always what I'm about. As you know, all of us have dealt with it at one point in our lives, and unfortunately we'll continue to deal with it. So I think uh I just have a random last question, because you have the knowledge of this, but I'm curious to get your answer. Do you ever think we'll truly fully understand the brain?
Oh shit.
Mm,
Shit.
no. And I want to say this because every time we look deeper into things, this is a quantum physics kind of principle, there's more to look at. So we never actually find the bottom, because even when we think we found the bottom, now, everything's made up of energy. When we go into deeper what that is, it leads to more questions about what energy is and how we can quantify it. So I think there's just some things, and that's kind of the exciting thing of life. We'll never fully have the answers, but it keeps us looking, and it keeps us motivated to kind of go down that rabbit hole. But I think we can get a lot of great insights about the brain up until then.
Oh no, I'm excited. I'm curious. I think the answer is no, because similar to that, every time I look at something, I'm just like, okay, well, we understand obviously what it is, but then there's certain parts of the brain that we don't understand, or being able to understand which parts go off during paralysis. And it's just, again, that's a whole nother episode by itself. But since we were
Yeah,
talking about mind mapping, I had to ask.
I
That
love
was my
it.
selfish question for the episode.
I love it. Any other questions you have, don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, Tessa. Well, we appreciate you. Thank you for hopping on the Chronic Couch. Until next time, guys.
Thanks, guys.